Hi, welcome back to the workshop for the first in what's going to be a series of shorter videos that aren't particularly guitar related, but relate more to what I do in the workshop in terms of the tools I use, the equipment I've got, and the techniques that I use. I also want these to be an opportunity for people to interact a lot more, so question and answer sessions, suggestions for other videos that I could do, etc. Now the first video I want to do is based around what has got to be the most important tool in anyone's workshop, and that's the workbench. I get a lot of questions about the workbench, and to be honest, I did promise back in January to do a video on it, and as we're in November now, I think it's about time that I did. Now when I first built the workshop, it was obvious I was going to need a good workbench. Initially I was working off what was not much more than a glorified table with a vise attached to it, but it simply wasn't up to the job. So I started to research what I would like to have, and the design I really liked the look of was the split top Roubo. So I used that as the basis for my design. I drew everything up in SketchUp, but unfortunately that was on an old laptop and I don't have those files anymore, unless I would kind of show you how that all went together. But using SketchUp was a very, very good way of going about it, because it gave me every measurement that I needed and gave me a good visual representation of what each component on the bench had to look like. So if you are going to do something like this, I would recommend getting SketchUp or a program like it. It was free when I got it. I don't think it is anymore, which is a bit of a shame, but there you go. Now in terms of materials for the bench, I actually dropped very, very lucky. There's quite a lot of wood involved in building this style of bench, and it would have been quite expensive. However, one day while I was around at my mother's, I noticed that there was some wood in a skip that was on the neighbour's drive. And initially I thought I could have that, cut it up and put it in my log burner, not realising what it was. So I had a word with the neighbour and she said, yeah, you can have anything you like out there. So upon further investigation, I saw that there was like at least a dozen 3-metre lengths of this 75 by 100 mil pitch pine. And as soon as I saw it, I kind of understood what it was. Way back in the late 70s, early 80s, a former owner of the property had put all these false beams into the ceiling of the kitchen, which was something he did at that point. And this was the timber that he'd used from that. And I immediately knew that this was going to be, you know, a lot better quality timber than you would get nowadays. And upon inspection, yeah, I was right. It is what appears to be pitch pine, very dense, very closely grained, and yeah, way, way better than anything you'd buy from a builder's merchants or a kind of do-it-yourself shop these days. And to buy it from a specialist timber supplier, it would be very, very expensive. So luckily I got all that for free. I cut it down as long as I could to get it in my car and shipped it off back home. And here's a picture of it stacked up and ready to go in the embryonic Shed of Dreams. But as you can see from the picture, it was covered in kind of a really dark stain and it was rough sawn. So I had to hand plane every single piece of this, and it took weeks to do and created bin loads of shavings, but it was ultimately really, really worth it. Okay, so that's enough of the history. We'll now have a look at the bench and how I went about constructing it. Now, perhaps the most obvious feature of this bench, as the name would suggest, is the split top. So it's made up of two great big slabs of pine. They're about 10.5 inches wide, about 4 inches thick, and the whole bench is probably just under 6 foot long. So as you can see, each of the halves of the top is a laminate of 4 of the pieces of the 4x3 timber. Obviously all of this had to be planed perfectly square on both sides to enable me to join it all together effectively. Obviously that is a lot of timber and it weighs an awful lot, and that's what gives this bench stability. So you can work on this bench and it just doesn't move. Doesn't matter what you're doing, it's absolutely rock solid. And it's a split top because this section actually comes out, and the benefit of that is you can get clamps down this gap and clamp work pieces down, etc. And also this centre section makes a handy tool rest, so you can put your saws and your chisels and stuff in there. I don't tend to do that because I film everything I do these days, and the tools sticking up out of the bench just obscure the view, which is a bit of a shame because it's very handy and it stops stuff rattling about and tends to keep your bench top very, very clean. As you can see, the side of the bench that I work on has got 2 rows of holes drilled in it, and these are for the bench dogs to go in, and these work really, really well in the tail vise for clamping stuff flat on the bed. You can also kind of insert them and use them as planing stops. You can just put your timber against them and plane. So that's a very, very useful feature to have. These are a couple of Veritas bench dogs, very good quality. I've had them years now, probably 4 or 5 years, and they look exactly the same as when I got them. In terms of the vices, there's a great big tail vise, and this is primarily used in conjunction with the bench dogs to hold things flat onto the bench top. You can put stuff in there as you would a normal vise, but if I'm doing that kind of work, I will tend to work on the other vise to do that. This was constructed for the bench and just uses a Veritas tail vise screw. The other vise is just a very, very standard screw vise. This one's by Irwin. I would like to upgrade this at some point with a quick release vise because it is a bit of a pain having to wind it backwards and forwards, but like anything, when I built the bench, I was on a budget, so that was all I could afford at the time. I think this was about £35. The tail vise screw was about 40. So realistically, £75 was the bulk of the outlay for this workbench. So that's the top and the vices. We'll now have a look at the construction of the rest of the bench. Okay, so the actual frame of the bench is again made of the same 4x3s. These stringers here are cut down to 4x2, but the legs are all 4x3, and these feet sections are also 4x3. Everything's mortised and tenoned together, and where these little caps are, there's a draw bore pin that goes through there. So as well as the glue that's holding it together, there's a mechanical element to the fixing that will just stop these joints from moving, because if these joints were to start moving, eventually they would wear and you'd just get loads of rock into the job. But these are absolutely rock solid. This bench is 4 years old now and it's as solid as the day it was built. There's a shelf underneath which at the moment is full of little bits of wood that I keep promising I'll use and never do. It's supposed to be for tools like my bench up and my planing stop, but it just gets filled up with rubbish and also gets filled up with sawdust that goes through the gap in the top. So I could perhaps make better use of that. Okay, and there it is, a quick tour of the bench of dreams. I've got to say I'm very happy with the bench. It's served me really, really well over the last 4 years. It has a lot of use and it is starting to show its age a little bit. So future plans are to give it a good sanding down, kind of get rid of some of the little dings and dents that are on the top surface and kind of clean it up, because it has got a bit of paint on it from some of the spray jobs I've done, etc. But bearing in mind that the top is probably 4 inches thick, you know, I've got a lot of material to sand into there, so that's not going to be a problem. In terms of other things I'd like to do to it, I will eventually get a much nicer vise fitted to it, a quick release one hopefully. That will make my life a lot easier. But other than that, I'm really happy with it. What would I change? If I was doing it again, I'd think twice about having the removable section in the middle. I don't really use it as a planing stop. I don't often clamp stuff through that gap. Obviously I can't use it to store tools in anymore because of the work I do filming these videos. And it is really, really annoying when you drop small things like screws and bolts and bearings and all sorts of things have fallen through that gap into the mess that is the shelf below, and it's usually a 20-minute job to go and find that thing. Okay, so I think I've covered everything, but if you think there's something I've missed, just drop me a question in the comments and I'll be happy to answer it. And also, while you're at it, if there's anything you would like to see me film in the future, any of the tools, any of the equipment or techniques that I use, just drop me a comment and I'll be happy to answer those that I can. And while you're at it, let me know what you think of this format of video, whether it's something you'd like to see more of, or whether you just want to see me focus on the guitar related stuff. I'd be really, really interested to find out your opinions on that. Okay, so I said at the beginning I'm going to make this a short video, so I'll get off before it gets too long. But as always, like if you've liked, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. I'll see you again very, very soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.